Yes, and I wasn't the first. According to the weather report, according to the log books, there were 4 ranges and 4 weather stations, and I was the king of all of them. I was in total charge of all of them. And so according to the log books, there were at least 41 weather observers before me for the 7 years before I got there in 1965 who had been up there, and there were at least 41, and every one of them had been compromised. Usually after just a few days, like 3 or 4 days, they would encounter something or see the aliens in the distance, or they would become so terrified of the place that they wouldn't actually go up the valley and take the weather reports. They would simply stay down on the base at Indian Springs, hide in the chow hall for breakfast, and make up the winds. And, for anybody who believes in global warming, I can show you tons of weather reports that aren't worth the paper they're written on, because the guys were just making them up because they weren't going up. They were too terrified to go up the valley. Others were attacked. Others were and burned and given medical discharges. And so I was the one that stayed. I was the one that. And the books describe how that came to be.
When you say that these people bailed, okay, Charles, where did they go? Because I have this issue with Area 51 that I bring up a lot, and I brought it up to George Knapp one time when I was talking with him in San Jose, and I said, you could probably count on almost one hand how many people out of the thousands of people that probably work or have worked throughout the past 50 years at that base that have come out and talked about their experiences, and that's a very small amount of people. So I always wonder, number one, how they're able to keep the people from speaking, and we're not talking about just people who had your kind of security clearance. We're talking about people who obviously had to bring you lunch or make you dinner, or the people who clean the bathrooms.
No one could come out there. I had to go in. I had to go into the base, into Indian Springs, for my food, for breakfast, dinner. I bunked over at night on the base. And nobody could come out there when they closed. When they closed the ranges, and they could close them, they would close them anytime the Pentagon wanted, the Whites wanted them, or anytime I wanted them. But nobody could come past the main range gate. I mean, physically, 6 inches past the main range gate to get a guy in trouble. And so when I say I had to do things alone, I mean totally alone, even if I was dying out there, because the secrecy out there is so great. However, in answer to your question, the first reason is that there isn't anything alien at Area 51 per se. Remember, the base is in Area 53 and 54.
Okay.
And Area 52 is only where sometimes the aliens might come in and disguised as humans, usually, and talk with the generals in a planned manner. But Area 53 and Area 54 is their main hangar, and Area 53 is their underground living areas. And when you're physically on the highway in Indian Springs and you're looking north up the valley, those mountains at the northern end, which are 40, 45 miles up there, there's a double perimeter around the base of those mountains. The humans
Charles,
guard the outer perimeter, the aliens guard the inner.
Well, that's really interesting, too, because a lot of people are really taken aback by the fact that our own U.S. military doesn't seem to police or guard Area 51 when you're just going down Mailbox Road. Now, let's do this. Let's take a break. I'm going to find out more about that, but I'm trying to set the stage here because this is a lot of information for people. Let's take a break. When we come back, what I want to do is get into the following. I want to finish up on how people are kept from speaking about this and not offered $100,000 and given cash when they get off at McCarran to talk about this stuff. And then I want to get into who these beings are and how much you actually know about the kind of relations they have with the U.S. military. Coming back after the break with Charles and Mr. Charles James Hall and his experiences at Area 53 and 54, correct, Charles?
That's correct. I was out at Indian Springs, and the north end of the valley is dreamland.
Okay, fantastic. We're coming back after the break. Charles James Hall, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. This is UFOnaut Radio with Jesse Randolph.
There are so many crash sites that have been under-investigated. I'm talking hatch cover with hieroglyphics, clearly extraterrestrial.
We are back now with Charles James Hall talking about his amazing experiences. We're just getting into the experiences that he had witnessing activities and potential alliances with extraterrestrials that are working. Are they still working to this day, Charles?
No, I'm certain of it, yeah.
Working to this day with extraterrestrials from other planets at Area 53 and 54. Now, when I say Area 53 and 54, most of you listening are saying, I've never heard of that. And, Charles, I'm sure you get that a lot. Everybody knows Area 51. You're telling us there's nothing going on over there.
I'm telling you, yeah. For example, I remember I was out there for almost 2.5 years. One day in 1966, after I'd gotten over my fear and I come to accept what I was seeing, I was watching one of their deep spacecraft come in, and it was landing at Dogbone Lake. And they have a double hull construction, and they're surrounded by force fields. And the spacecraft I was looking at was physically something like 40 miles or so northeast of me. And it was normally they came in 8,000 to 12,000 miles an hour and then would just stop on a dime at 10,000 feet. And the craft was coming in much too fast. And so when it got to 10,000 feet, the alien pilot powered up quickly so as to, because he didn't want to hit the ground, so they could just stop on a dime at 10,000 feet. And when he powered up suddenly, and we're talking about a ship that was 40 miles away from me, he made the lights in my weather shack flicker, and the fields coming off that craft forced my electrical generator to come offline. As you see in my books, I had a diesel power. I had 2 diesels, and they had electrical generators. I was out at range 3, and that was at 45 miles. And the craft, when it powered, the kind of power the deep spacecraft was exhibiting could force that offline at 40 miles. Well, Area 51 itself, the inhabited area, is only 6 miles by 10 miles wide. There's no alien general, no human general, no Air Force general that would want a craft with that kind of power coming into Area 51, because if it's even running at low power, it'll burn everybody in the area, 6 to 10 miles square.
So you're saying
the deep spacecraft has so much power. Even the scout craft, when powered up, you could feel the field at 1.5 miles. And see, there's no alien general, there's no human general, no Air Force general that wants craft of that type anywhere close to Area 51 or Area 52. For the same reason that we don't have jet engine. When you go to an Air Force, when you go to an airport.
Fair enough, Charles. Yeah. Let's get in. I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves because we really want to get back to this picture we're painting, which is here's Charles. He has a really high clearance level, and he's having these experiences. Did it start with sightings? Did you start seeing these crafts in the distance?
No, it started with them coming into my barracks at Indian Springs with the American generals with them.
Okay, describe a scenario like that for us. I want to know what it's like for someone at your age. How old were you?
I was 19. I'd gotten a perfect score in logical reasoning and on the Air Force exams at putting 2 and 2 together and making 4 and vice versa. And so when they sent me to Indian Springs, as I described in Book 1, to relieve the guy who was there at the time, he'd gone over the hill, and the generals knew it, but they wouldn't prosecute him because they also knew what he was facing, and he's dead now. And I was staying in the big double barracks down along the flight line, and I was the only one. And there were only like 7 or 8 people at the Indian Springs Auxiliary Air Base in those days. It was a very deserted place and a tiny place in a great big desert. And I was staying in the double barracks, and all by myself, and it was my duty to get up at 3 a.m, and the aliens would come through with the American generals. The American generals were giving them a tour of the place. And
what did they look like? How did you know they were aliens? Talk to me. Describe the situation when you first encountered this. This is a major event in your life.
The aliens are tall. Throughout most of their adult life, they're about the height that I am. I'm 5'11", but as they get older, they grow. So when they would come through, the tall white, and their skin is as white as a piece of paper, and their eyes are somewhat larger than humans. They're like twice the size, and they stretch further around the side of their head than humans, but they otherwise look humanoid, and they have men, women, and children, just like humans. and their emotions are very much like ours, except the way they handle anger is different. And we can talk about that later. But they're more frail than we are. But each one is an individual, and there is some overlap. So when they would come through at night, you'd have like an American 3-star, an Air Force 3-star, or Air Force 2-star. You'd have a bird colonel. You might have at most 3 or 4 American generals. Nobody below the rank of colonel. And you always had 2- and 3-star generals with them. The Americans always had 2 or 3-star generals, and they were giving them a tour of the place. And they would give them a tour of the place. And then the alien generals, the aliens that were coming through, would come through in groups, sometimes as little as 4, but sometimes so large that out in the athletic fields at Indian Springs, they would actually use the bleachers, and they were showing them around. Yeah.
How is this explained to you at 19 when all of a sudden you're seeing an extraterrestrial being walking around with a general? How were you briefed? Who did you report to? I mean,
Nobody briefed me.
They just let you experience it.
That's right. Nobody briefed me. They just said that when I went up there, my own commanders weren't told. Only the Nellis base commander and the number 2 guy were the only ones that knew. Nobody briefed me. What they said was, try not to be too lonesome. If you get too lonely, you can call us and tell us that you're lonesome. But there was no briefing, no debriefing, nothing. They just said your duty is to get up at 3 a.m. every morning. It's beautiful duty. You have your own truck. You have extra pay. You're all by yourself. Nobody can come out and ask you any questions. Nobody can inspect you. All you got to do is drive your truck up Indian Springs Valley at 3 a.m. and set up for a balloon release to measure the winds, and release the balloon at 4:30 in the morning, and then phone it into Nellis with the winds. Track the balloon for 10,000, 15,000 feet and phone it into Nellis, and then they'll tell you how many more they want that day. 3, 4, depends on the day, maybe 5. You get to go in for breakfast, lunch. You get off early. You might be getting off as early as 2 in the afternoon, and you can do anything else you want. Come in Las Vegas or so on.
Yeah, so it sounds like a great job, but then all of a sudden you're being exposed to the fact that all of a sudden there's ET on the base. So what goes through your mind, and how did you handle the situation? Did it develop into anything else, or did you just see these people walking around once in a while in the barracks?
It took me 6 months to figure out that I wasn't nuts or dreaming, or to get over the terror. And then I eventually, as I describe in my books, I made friends with the teacher and the Range 4 Harry. That was their CIA names. Those were the alien names. They're more frail than we are. So Harry, he was the same height I am. But based on the footprints he left in the sand, he only weighed between 90 and 110 pounds. I was credited with saving the life of the little girl of the daughter of the teacher, and she was the daughter of the ambassador. And I was also credited with saving the life of tour guide. And as I described in my books, I was also credited with many other accomplishments. But an example of how terrifying it was. I remember, like when I went back to my barracks at night, I would close. There were only 2 doors, and there were only a few windows, and it wasn't very well lit. And naturally, I'd close the doors, and I'd wake up like at 1 a.m, and the door would be open. And then, and I'd think, well, my golly, who came and opened the door? And it was propped open. See, and then like one night, I got up and I was sleeping in the barracks, and I had to get up. It was like 12:30, and I had to get up and relieve myself. And I was in my skivvies, and so the latrines were in the middle. So I just got up, and I was still half asleep, and I was kind of hurrying down the hallway to make it to the latrine in the middle. And as I was doing it, there were these white people in the side cubicles, because the cubicles didn't have doors on them. They were the military style from World War II. It was an old wooden barracks, and they weren't human. And I thought it was just because I was still dreaming, or I must still be half asleep. And so I got to the latrine in the middle, and which didn't have any privacy. And then and I suddenly realized that you could hear noises down there, and they were making them. And I was thinking, well, if I'm dreaming, how come there's noises? And now all of a sudden, this isn't the time to panic, because there's no place to run to. They're between you and the door. And so I'm religious. I'm Roman Catholic. It was time to pray, and I decided that it must just be me. And I mean, the terror that you'd have at night, like as I described in my book.
One time when I was talking with him in San Jose, and I said, you could probably count on almost one hand how many people out of the thousands of people that probably work or have worked throughout the past 50 years at that base that have come out and talked about their experiences, and that's a very small amount of people. So I always wonder, number one, how they're able to...
Others were burned and given medical discharges. And so I was the one that stayed. I was the one that... And the books describe how that came to be.
When you say that these people bailed, okay, Charles, where did they go? Because I have this issue with Area 51 that I bring up a lot, and I brought it up to George Knapp.
Down on the base at Indian Springs, hide in the chow hall for breakfast and make up the winds. And, for anybody who believes in global warming, I can show you tons of weather reports that aren't worth the paper they're written on, because the guys were just making them up because they weren't going up. They were too terrified to go up the valley. Others were attacked. Others were, yes. And see, I wasn't the first. According to the weather report, according to the log books, there were 4 ranges and 4 weather stations, and I was the king of all of them. I was in total charge of all of them. And so according to the log books, there were at least 41 weather observers before me for the 7 years before I got there in 1965 who had been up there, and there were at least 41, and every one of them had been compromised. Usually after just a few days, like 3 or 4 days, they would encounter something or see the aliens in the distance, or they would become so terrified of the place that they wouldn't actually go up the valley and take the weather reports. They would simply stay